Okay, I think we're good to go. And as Doug said in the background, we've learned to use Zoom over the time of the pandemic. And I just would remind people to mute themselves just now, because once we start, it'd be good if we just hear the people that are presenting. And welcome everybody to our SCOA presentation by our pro bono law students. And today's topic is going to be driving law and concerns of older adults. So for those who haven't met me before, my name is Jane McPhee, and I'm a really long-time volunteer and a former board member of the Saskatoon Council on Aging and a member of our Council on Aging's Age-Friendly Community Development Committee. We do a number of things, and a subcommittee of us works with the pro bono students. But as we begin this afternoon, we want to acknowledge that we have the privilege of meeting on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of First Nations and Métis people, and we're grateful to share these lands with them. We hope that you'll find this presentation to be informative and helpful. Our pro bono students, Brianne and Aidan Skaff, will introduce themselves shortly. And we're also really fortunate today to have with us Jane Sexton, who's a nurse with the Medical Review Unit of the Saskatchewan Government Insurance, SGI. And then after the student's presentation, Jane will be here in case we have some questions that are more pertinent to SGI than to the materials that the students have been presenting on. So welcome, Jane, and we're really grateful that you're here with us this afternoon. So the Pro Bono Students Canada is an organization through the University of Saskatchewan College of Law that we've worked with each year for the last several years. And our SCOA Age-Friendly Community Development Committee, as I mentioned, a subcommittee of us, works alongside these students on a project that's useful to us as the Council on Aging, but also allows the students to explore an area of interest to them about older adults and through the lens of a law student. So this year, Brianne and Aidan were the students who chose to work with us, and they chose to explore Saskatchewan driving laws. Now, you probably saw, some of you who were on earlier, Doug Surtees, who is both a professor at the College of Law and a board member at the Council on Aging. Doug has been the person who has been overseeing the project with the students to meet the needs of both the law school perspective and SCOA's perspective. So we're grateful to Doug for his involvement with us over these last few years. We also always like to start these presentations by reminding people that the students aren't here to answer legal questions or to provide legal advice. But they will present information that we're hoping will be helpful to you as older adults with concerns about driving as we become older. Now, we also like to give a little plug for the Saskatoon Council on Aging. For those of you who are new to us, SCOA is a nonprofit organization which started back in 1991. And our work is dedicated to promoting positive aging for all in an age-friendly community. And what that means is positive aging means feeling good as you grow older. And we think that the key to positive aging is staying actively engaged and informed. And so these sessions are part of that, staying engaged and informed. And we do provide a wide range of programs and events. And at the end, I can tell you about a couple other things that are coming up. So now Cynthia is going to show you Brianne and Aidan. And they are going to introduce themselves this afternoon. So I'll turn it over to them.
Hi, my name is Brianne. I am a second-year law student at the University of Saskatchewan here at the College of Law. This project and SCOA in general is very close to my heart. I'm really close with my grandparents, so this project really spoke to me. In particular, the topic is really close to my heart. I'm from Alberta, and my grandma actually lost her license while living in my small town in Alberta with me. So I became a huge part of getting her around and doing daily tasks with her. So I recognize the loss of autonomy that can occur alongside the loss of a license. And I'm deeply empathetic with that, as well as I'm empathetic with the safety issues that could have occurred with her driving. So I saw this firsthand, and yeah, I was really interested to learn the legal side of it. I would also like to note and thank Jane Sexton for coming today. It was really, really great of her to come, and we appreciate it.
Like Jane said, my name is Aidan Skaff. I'm a first-year law student here at the University of Saskatchewan. Prior to beginning law here, I completed a degree at the University of Regina in business administration and also in economics. I was very excited to have the opportunity to work with SCOA this year, as I am also, like Bree, really close with my grandparents. And so just having an opportunity to work with such a great organization that feels close to home was really nice.
So I think I'm going to share my screen now so we can give you some slides while we go through this presentation. Let me know if everyone can see that, or if anyone can't see that, I guess. So we kind of went through the introductions. So I would begin by just sort of talking about the law in Saskatchewan in general around renewing your license as an older adult. So there is no, we call it hard law in Saskatchewan. There's no legislation that states that you must undergo a health assessment or examination when you go to renew your license at a certain age. So this actually differs from other provinces in Canada, such as Alberta, where in Alberta, it's mandatory for older adults to undergo a health assessment at the age of 75, at 80, and then every 2 years after that. So basically, when you hit a certain age, you are required to undergo a health assessment in order to keep your license in some provinces. But that is not the case in Saskatchewan. So there is no legislated timeframe or age in which you must go forward to undergo a health assessment to maintain your license. So the legislation that does apply in Saskatchewan is the Traffic Safety Act. So this act may require a medical report to be filed under certain circumstances. So most likely, if a driver has been reported to the administrator of the Traffic Safety Act, or sometimes to the medical review unit or to SGI directly, if a report has been filed such as this, that is a case in which you may have to undergo a medical assessment to see if you can maintain your license. But again, it's not at a certain age or at a certain time frame. This occurs and you file it to the administrator, and the administrator can look over that and review your medical review, and if possibly revoke your license right there.
Okay, so who has a duty to report driving inability? There's 3 different groups we're going to talk about today. The first is that the law requires that drivers report themselves if they have any significant changes to their health that may affect their driving. This would include new or worsening health conditions that affect a person's vision, their strength, and or their mental capabilities for driving. The law also requires medical practitioners to report individuals with conditions that may affect their ability to drive safely. This includes reporting their name, their address, and any clinical condition that they may have that would make it dangerous for them to operate a motor vehicle. Additionally, optometrists must report any person who's suffering from a condition that would make their vision dangerous to drive. These medical officers are required to make their reports in good faith, or an action could be brought against them. We'll speak on this a little bit more in the next slides, but this means that they have a duty to report these things, but that they also cannot bring up fake reports or cannot report things that do not make it dangerous for somebody to drive. Finally, the law also permits for people of the public to make these reports. These are people such as family members, it could be friends, it could be neighbors, anybody that knows somebody who may have a condition that makes it dangerous for them to drive.
So like Aidan said, medical practitioners are required to report under the Act, and we just wanted to really zone in on what a medical practitioner was, because that doesn't just entail doctors like one might assume. Actually, under the Act, it's a pretty broad term, and it goes towards psychologists, nurse practitioners, occupational therapists, and as Aidan spoke to a little bit, optometrists are also required under the Act to report if someone's eyesight has become a concern for driving. So therefore, this mandatory reporting is not just your doctor, but it can be your psychologist, your nurse, practitioner or your occupational therapist that is required under the Act to report any individual who they believe would be unsafe to drive. This mandatory reporting that we mentioned that they must undergo is under Section 283 of the Traffic Safety Act. So it is a requirement under the Act. They must make these reports in good faith, like Aidan mentioned, or an action can be brought against them. So lastly, reports of this nature are privileged. So it doesn't go into trial or anything. You can never really find out who reported your driving, and that's to protect the safety of these medical practitioners or the public.
There's two main reasons we want to talk about today why medical practitioners must report drivers. The first one's not as much legal, and then the second one's going to be more legal. So the first reason is anyone who's unsafe to drive is a risk to themselves as well as to the other people on the road. And we want to really emphasize that today, is that it really is about the safety of everybody on the road, both the drivers and the other people on the road. No one wants to put themselves in danger, and no one wants to put other people in danger when they're driving. And so this is a big part of the reason why medical practitioners must report people who have conditions that make it unsafe for them to drive. And that's just to keep everybody safe on the road, both the people that are driving and the other people on the road. As well, in a more legal sense, almost all Canadian jurisdictions hold medical practitioners legally liable for failing to report individuals that the medical practitioners believe are unsafe to drive. So in other words, the law requires them to report people who may be unsafe to drive, and if they do not do that, they can be held legally responsible.
Yeah, so that is a big one, the fact that your doctor can be held liable if they allow you to drive and they knew or should have known that it was unsafe for you to do so. Because of this, physicians are regularly called to evaluate driving fitness, and they must do so in good faith, and they must say if you are unsafe to drive. Because this can sometimes be a gray area, there are guidelines for medical practitioners who are unsure about whether to make a report or not around a certain individual, and these come from the Canadian Medical Protection Association. So in the court cases to date, where we have looked at the suspension of licenses or the filing of a report by a medical practitioner, the courts are greatly influenced by these guidelines. They look to these guidelines to see if a report was maybe made in good faith or if a report was made fairly. So these guidelines do hold a pretty large legal standpoint. So Canadian courts have decided, while looking at these guidelines, that it's not a criteria that you can just check boxes off. Every time that a physician reports an individual, it is to be done on an individual basis. So the most important consideration there is that the effect of the health condition on an individual's ability to drive is not just because of a diagnosis. A doctor can't just find a diagnosis and declare that that makes someone unsafe to drive. You have to look at how that diagnosis is affecting that specific individual and move from there. So in doing this, they're going to consider the interests of the patient as well as the interests of the welfare of the community. Like Aidan said, this is to protect everyone on the roads. So they have a lot of considerations to think about. With this, driving restrictions based purely on age are not appropriate. One cannot determine just at a certain age that an individual is unsafe to drive. Physicians have to undergo an individual assessment and see if that person is unsafe to drive. Some things that may affect your ability to drive under the guidelines are physical conditions such as arthritis. If there's severe arthritis to the point where you are unable to drive, you may be reported by your physician. There's some medications that are prescribed that while taking those medications, the side effects could lead to you being unsafe to drive. And there's also cognitive changes that can be a threat to your driving ability. Patients with mild dementia, for instance, may be assessed yearly. So again, this is an individualized basis. So just because someone has dementia does not mean right away that they're going to be restricted from driving, but we'll look at that dementia on a scale. If it's mild, then they may say, come back in a year for another assessment. And they should make that known to the individual and to people in the individual's life, that this is going to be assessed again. But it's not going to necessarily mean just because you have dementia, you're going to be restricted from driving or your license will be suspended right there. With that, Restrictions may be also applied rather than full license suspensions. And Aidan is going to discuss this more later, but this is under the Traffic Safety Act of Section 38. There is an ability to give just a restricted license rather than suspend it altogether. Oh, you also do have the right to file an appeal with the Highway Traffic Board. And we thought this was important to just mention here. As we said, those guidelines are used by courts and used by individuals to assess a driver's ability. So if you have taken a look at those guidelines and you believe that you were assessed poorly or unfairly, you do have the ability to appeal that under the Highway Traffic Board. So you can have someone else look at your case and look at your medical review.
Okay, so just to go over some of SGI's requirements and some things that SGI has available. One of the really nice things SGI has is a document on their website called the Mature Driver. This document lays out important information for aging adults as to driving. This also includes a self-evaluation tool to determine if a person is still able to drive safely. Again, this is a document on the SGI website called the Mature Driver. It is, we did talk about, it is up to every driver to report any changes to their health status or anything that may be relevant to their ability to drive. This includes things like new or worsening health conditions, and changes in vision are included in this category. People who fail to report changes to their health or drive with a suspended license and cause an accident may not be covered by their SGI insurance. Additionally, an individual will be held personally liable for the damages suffered by another driver in the event of an accident. As Bree mentioned, I'll just go over a little bit of some of the restricted license options SGI offers. So they do offer restricted licenses as an alternative for people who may be in danger of losing their license. Some of these restrictions include things like wearing prescribed glasses when driving, not driving at night, only driving within a 40-kilometer radius of your address, only driving within an 80-kilometer radius of your address, and only driving outside or inside of city limits. These options may allow a person to maintain their license for a longer period of time. For example, a driver whose night vision is diminishing as they age may drive with a license restriction that prevents them from driving after dark. This would allow that person to still attend appointments during the day, still go out and pick up their groceries or prescriptions, and go and visit friends during those daylight hours.
So a big part of why this discussion is important is that there are dangers that exist for older adults. As individuals age, physical and mental abilities do change, and these changes, including changes to your vision and your ability to react, they can affect driving, and they can happen very gradually. So often when gradual changes are happening to anyone, you're not going to notice it as much as severe changes. You're not going to wake up one day and just notice that something is different, because it's happening slowly and it's happening every day. So it's really important that we do have medical practitioners or people in your life, the public, that are willing to possibly report this driving ability. Driving is a complex task, and I think we forget that because it's something that we do every single day and it becomes really natural, but it is complex and it does require attention, memory processing. It requires physical skills, reaction time that, as we said, do just decline sometimes with age. So again, you might not realize this is happening, which is why it's important for family members to maybe step in at times. The ability to process visual information is huge when driving. Your reaction time to something jumping out on the road is going to affect your ability to drive safely in conditions that maybe are unforeseen, right? There's going to be times where the drive doesn't go as expected, and that's when we really need all of our abilities to be on par with what's safe. So compared to other groups, older adults do have more collisions per kilometers driven. The risks from dying of a collision or higher injuries are going to be higher for older adults. So these dangers are really why people often resort to reporting older drivers rather than having them on the road. This comes quite often out of a place of caring and a place of not wanting someone that you care about to be on the road when they possibly shouldn't be. So I think that that's really important to note, especially I think we're coming to an end of our presentation, is just that reasoning behind it and why it's not often something that's done out of not concern, but it's done out of concern. And we recognize the loss of autonomy that can occur from this, but in weighing that with the possibility of having someone you care about hurt on the road, I think it comes to people to just maybe report and have it reviewed by a professional. Oh, one more.
So thankfully, there is places that you can go to receive assistance on this matter. Things like driving skills can be refreshed through courses offered by the Saskatchewan Safety Council. Access to these courses is free and open to everybody. Additionally, the Canadian medical community is aware that a loss of a driver's license can be hard on the people affected, the individual who loses their license. After a license is revoked, physicians should continue to monitor their patients and schedule a follow-up appointment. Furthermore, if one loses their license through these processes, that does not mean that they necessarily have to lose their autonomy. Some Saskatchewan cities provide accessible and assisted transportation options, including things like low-rise buses. There's always the option to, as well as pre-booked rides, such as Uber or taxis, which are also available using their apps or making a phone call. If someone is unable to access these themselves, often a family member or friend is able to help. All of this information will be located in a brochure that will be coming out later. I believe Jane's going to speak to that a little bit more at the end of our presentation when that brochure will be coming out. But we'd like to thank you so much for listening to our presentation. And if you have any questions for Brianne or I, Jane or Doug, I believe we're all available to answer questions at this point.
Yes, thank you for listening.
So thank you, Brianne and Aidan, for that presentation. And yes, we are going to be posting the brochure that Brianne and Aidan have worked on, and it'll have some of the same information. So if you have some people that you'd like to share that information with, that will be available on our SCOA website. And I suspect after a while we might even have some paper brochures, although we don't do that so much anymore, do we? We don't tend to use paper, but I also was just going to say that, just to give another plug to the Council on Aging, we do have a partnership with the City of Saskatoon, and we've done quite a bit of work with the transit system. And now, as Aidan said, we have actually all of the fleet of buses in Saskatoon for the fixed location travel is all on buses that are kneeling buses, and they make that more accessible for older adults, but also for other ages of people with strollers or those little grocery carts that people have. I think sometimes we think it's only about old age friendly, but an age friendly city is friendly for all ages. And we have, as I said, done some work with the city. We've done some, we've produced a video that the bus drivers and others of the city workers get to view and to understand a little bit about special needs of older adults. So all of those things are part of us becoming an age-friendly city, which is partly what we do at the Council on Aging. So now we do have, are you going to put Jane on spotlight too, Cynthia? Because we do have Jane Sexton with us from the unit at SGI that evaluates people's driving and makes assessments. So does anyone have any questions for Aidan or Brianne or Jane? Hello, Jane, welcome.
Thank you again for being here, Jane. I was going to maybe pose a question to Jane just at the beginning of maybe what it looks like from your perspective of what happens in the process when someone comes forward to be assessed, or what that looks like, if you could speak on that, and maybe your role in general if you want to introduce yourself. But thanks again.
Yeah, my name is Jane Sexton. I'm with Medical Review. I've been with the department for almost 21 years, so I've been around a little while. What I'd like to just confirm is that there is no legislation in Saskatchewan related to aging drivers and the requests of any medical reports or vision reports. There are, I think, a couple of provinces that currently have it that are looking to get rid of it, simply because it isn't an actual way to measure someone's medical fitness to drive. The numbers aren't. So when we get reports in with people that have had concerns brought to them or brought to us about their driving or about health conditions, it's any age. So we have young people that have been in the school system that have required extra support in the school system, and now they want to go through that, almost like that rite of passage of obtaining their driver's license. Yet they may have had some concerns medically leading up to that point. So their occupational therapist, for instance, who are obligated under law, may send us a report and say, you know, this young person has these medical conditions and these are the concerns that I have. So it's just a way that they've been reported early to our department. It doesn't mean that they will never ever drive. They've just been reported early. And we actually just cleared a driver that's 103 years old the other day in our department. So what a milestone that is. So again, yeah, medical concerns brought to us, something that will affect mobility and motor movement, response and reaction time, the way that the brain processes information and makes decisions and applies those decisions in a timely way. Vision, you had mentioned B restrictions earlier. So when it comes to something like a restriction for not driving at night, it may be because that person has an eye condition that affects night driving. And when there is a condition like that, there can be an issue with what's called contrast sensitivity. So that means if they are looking ahead, they see the curb, and we know that there's a road just 6 inches or so below the curb, but they can't tell the difference of where that is. So they may think that the road keeps going up to the sidewalk, and it doesn't. So if you have an older person crossing the road, a younger person, a child on a bike, they may not know that that's where their road, like where they should be stopping, because to them it's the road, and they may think that the child is further down or something along those lines. Yeah, so there are definite things that we do ask for medical reports with, but aging, no, there isn't anything in Saskatchewan that we ask for. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much for
Okay.
speaking on that. Does anyone else have any questions that we could maybe touch on?
I was wondering if Jay could take us through the process. What happens when, and what would be a typical process? You know, somebody reports an older adult for, we'll say, not some medical condition. They feel that they're not able to put everything together. They're just not fast enough. They're not saying things that don't seem to be right.
When someone does get reported to our office by a member of the public, we would ask that person to have, if there's enough information for us to act on. It can't be something like, well, I see this person driving and I know they're over 80 and they shouldn't be driving anymore. We're not going to act on that. That isn't a fair or just reason to ask. If that same member of the public says something along the lines of, you know, I have coffee with them every couple of weeks and they've been backing into my garage door over and over, or my fence, I'm really worried about them driving. And if it's something along those lines, then yeah, we would ask for medical information. Those members of the public are always kept confidential. Sometimes people can figure out where the request starts from. But if they were to call our department, our customer, and say, how did this come about? We would simply say, we received information, someone is very concerned about your driving. That's the reason why we've asked for a medical report or a vision report. If that person that has reported is one of the practitioners, I guess with the reporting body, if they say that they don't want to release their identity, if they want to remain confidential themselves, and if they say something like, this person shouldn't drive anymore, they have Parkinson's disease, they also have really bad cataracts, I don't think they should be driving, but I don't want you to tell them who sent this. Well, we still have to go through the process of asking for medical information. So with a practitioner remaining confidential, it can add up to 2 months for us to take any type of licensing decision when somebody's not medically fit to drive. As far as when we get a report, what we would do is ask that person to have medical information or vision information sent to us. We would, as a standard time frame, give 30 days, and that's considered to be an appropriate time for someone to get that information sent to us. There are situations where we would be able to give a short extension to that, an extension of time. Once we get the medical report in our office, we would review it, and if that person is deemed medically fit to drive from that point, the doctor or the nurse practitioner signs them off and says, yep, they're fit to drive. They do have Parkinson's or they do have cataracts, so I think that you guys should follow them. Then we would ask for regular medical reports or regular vision reports. If that someone had been, that doctor, I should say, had written something like, I don't feel that they should drive anymore, and they marked no more driving on our medical form, then we would give notice to that person by sending them a letter. We would give anywhere from a week up to 3 weeks of notice, depending on that person's specific, file situation. And we would let them know that there would be a medical suspension imposed on their license. And there would be an effective date. So if someone is no longer medically fit or not medically fit, then we have a responsibility as the licensing body to have that person cease driving at that time. Now, there are some situations where people are not to drive for a specific period of time. If a doctor writes to us and says, this person has epilepsy and they had a seizure 2 months ago and they shouldn't be driving, as the regulatory body, as those who make the licensing decisions, we would have to impose a medical suspension on that person's license until they remained that 6 months seizure free, which is what the doctor would have told us. That is also a guideline that is in the Canadian Medical Association guideline for driving. So the guidelines, again, that we use, Canadian Medical Association, and there is also the national guideline that is set out by the National Safety Code, and that is written up by the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators. That council has guidelines that are made up by physicians, GPs and specialists throughout Canada. And they also review different studies that have been done. So when there is a guideline that is sort of in between, that's where we try to kind of marry the two things together. What about when there's a cost to getting medical? So if somebody has had a medical requested from us, we pay for the cost of that medical. And it says right on our form and in our letter that the physician should not be charging you any additional fee. And there is actually a billing code that the physician's office is supposed to use. Like, we've tried to make it as easy to follow as possible. Because office staff, physicians, they're busy. They're answering their phones and they're booking appointments and they're very busy. So we've tried to make it as simple as possible. We put the billing code right on the form. And when we do get a report in and the person phones us and says, you know, the doctor charged me for this, we tell them we'll, you know, send in the invoice and we'll pay it. Then we also go that next step and send a letter to the doctor to say, we paid for it this time, but you shouldn't be charging your patient for it. When it comes to something like, and that also goes for specialists as well. When it comes to something like a vision report that we've asked from an optometrist, we have had an agreement with them for a very long time that we would pay $40 as part of their vision report. Now, over the years, we've tried to renegotiate that to increase it a bit, so that we would be paying more, and they haven't agreed with that. So it has remained at that same amount of money for a long time, and I'm not sure what the ins and outs of it were or what it is, but they didn't want to change the fee, the amount that they would charge. So yeah. Driving first, or should we tell the person's doctor? You know, sometimes it's a joint effort, or not necessarily effort, because that sounds like it. Sometimes it can be an effort for family. Sometimes it truly can be a really, really hard thing to go through. So if it's good to know if the physician is on board as well, so that there could be support from the physician. There's always the concern that a nurse practitioner or a doctor or an occupational therapist has about changing that relationship that they have with their patient. That is always something that I think could be first and foremost. They don't want to lose that trust. And in the same respect, again, they're required by law to tell us if someone's not medically fit. And, you know, part of the responsibility sometimes could be for them to have an early conversation with their patient and say, you know, I think I'll be okay with you driving right now. But we just diagnosed you with dementia a year ago. So I think it might be a good idea to have maybe your son or your wife come with you to your appointment once in a while, just to see how things are going from their perspective too. Sometimes that can help buffer those licensing decisions a little bit. The goal is for us to have people driving as long as they're safely able to do so. And by earlier reporting, we can sometimes get feedback from a loved one, from their neighbor, you know, if there's someone that's able to go to appointments with them and able to try and advocate for them or help advocate for them. And sometimes there just isn't a lot of luck with getting the doctor to, I guess, align with what you as a family would want. You know, we do get calls from family that have had really big concerns because they're the ones that see their loved one every day, or they see their neighbor every day. They see the doctor once every 6 months or a year for prescriptions. And oh, there's, hey, how you doing? That kind of thing. And that's why it's important sometimes for family to go with people once in a while, just to touch base, an extra set of ears. Ideally, it would be great for family or friends and physicians to kind of work together. because sometimes that licensing decision, it can be like somebody's taken a swing at you. It's a really, really hard thing to not have. It's one of the things that we start doing when we're very young, and Saskatchewan has a very high rural population. And some of us started driving when we were probably 8 years old. That's the nature of our province. That's the way it is. So to start any type of monitoring process from us at a later time can be really, it can be some pretty devastating news when there could have been more collaboration or more transparency from a doctor or a nurse practitioner. And, you know, I acknowledge, we all do, that their job is hard. They have a tough, tough job. They really do. They have so many difficult conversations and giving news about so many things, that it's just one more thing that they have to talk about that's tough. It really is.
There was just one more question there for you, Jen. I think you might have touched on it, just the process and steps of assessing a cognitive patient and if they don't recognize it. You kind of were touching on just approaching it as a community and a group, but if you have anything else to add on.
Yeah, you know, and that's the one of the difficult things is when people don't recognize that they have a change with their cognitive health. So that always leads then to not having insight as far as driving. There wouldn't be any type of restriction that would be available if somebody doesn't have that insight, because they could just get in their vehicle and drive anyway, which is a huge safety risk. We do have, where we have had in the past, some physicians, nurse practitioners, even occupational therapists, have written on a piece of paper and said, this is your driving prescription. This is your driving, this is what you can drive right now, or you can't drive anymore. And it's written out more as a, like I said, more as a prescription or kind of, I guess, a directive. And that does work. Often, a lot of the time, it's when someone has progressed with their cognition to the point that they, again, don't recognize that there is an issue. We've had family tell us that they've hidden the keys, that they've disabled vehicles, and taken some of those routes. The thing is, if someone is still able to call CAA or a tow company and say, you know, my car doesn't work, and they'll take it to the garage, or they'll say, oh, well, the battery's disconnected, that's all it is. Not everybody can recognize some of the signs, you know. Yeah, does that help at all?
Yeah, thank you for touching on that. It's just a really hard position for everyone, I feel like.
Yeah, it is. It is. Like I said, it's one of the first things that we do growing up in our province, and it's a really, really hard thing to not have. Yeah.
Completely. Does anyone else have any questions? I don't want to take too much more of Jane's time. There was one in the chat about children disagreeing. So I think maybe they're asking, what does your unit do if a child disagrees?
So adult children, sometimes it isn't easy to, I guess, explain what it is that we're looking at. We try to be very clear and very open about it. when we have licensing decisions that an adult child may disagree with. Sometimes that person may live in another province. They may live in a different town or city, and they may not see every day what that person has for a level of function. Sometimes children, adult children, don't disagree. And, you know, is that easy for them at home? No, it probably isn't. There's a lot of, as you had said yourself, a lot of extra responsibility that you have when you're helping care for someone. And when we do have people that disagree, sometimes what we hear, it's not, I'll say it's not unusual for us to hear, well, that's changing my life. I don't have time for that. And I don't know that they would intend it in the way that it sounds. But I'm a very firm believer that there is no age that is a throwaway in our province. Absolutely, there is no age. I had advocated for my mom for many years and supported her through her life and her death. And I don't believe that there is any age that's a throwaway. I think that's an injustice to the people that we share our lives with. So.
Thank you for touching on that. And yeah, I would agree with the comment in the chat that children do see it different and probably sometimes are really aware of the problems clear. So they're probably great people to support and sometimes have to have those tough conversations.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Just so full disclosure, I am actually a retired occupational therapist, and that is one of the most difficult discussions that you have to have with families and with patients and clients, just in terms of what it means in their life and what it means on their aging journey too. You know, it's sort of a signal, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, it's a tough one for sure. But any last questions for Brianne or Aidan or Jane from our listening audience today? Any other final questions before we wrap up this afternoon? Thanks everybody for your questions and for your participation. Any other final words?
I just want to say that I'm really glad to have been available to come and talk to you guys, and I'm hoping that you were able to get some information that's helpful that you may be able to pass on to somebody else. And it was really great seeing all of you. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Jane, I have a question, and that is SCOA often has keeps these webinars online so people can view them later. And actually, I had some friends who were a little bit afraid to come, but would be interested in watching and getting the information later. I mean, this is a very sensitive area, and as everybody has alluded to, you're losing a lot when you give up your license. So I'm trusting that this will be on the website. The webinar will be available for people to see at a later date.
Yeah, that's why Cynthia was recording it, Elliot, and I see in her note it will be available. Yeah.
Okay, great. So that's something that we can tell people. You can tell people about Jane too, that they can see this on the website, because I think it does really help to have things talked about and clarified like they have been today.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll ask that either Brianne or Aidan put just our basic phone number to our department. Sometimes there are general questions that we can answer, and sometimes it's better to know what you're talking about in specific. So I'll give you our, you know, it's online and everything, but I'll still give it to you if you want to put it with the presentation.
Thank you. I think I did have it already added to our brochure, actually.
Yeah, I was
Yes.
say, I
That
think
was
it was on the
okay.
brochure. Yeah.
Sounds
I
good.
hope it's the general one, but again, we can let you go, Jane, but thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Your insight was really, really helpful.
Yeah,
Take
thank
care.
you so much,
Okay,
Jane.
thank you. Have a nice day.
And I also would just like to add the Saskatchewan Safety Council course for mature drivers. I also would highly recommend that. The time that I did it, it was really helpful. And some of the exercises that we did actually did convince a few of the people there that it was time to get rid of their vehicle. And they were able to really highlight for them some of the challenges that happen, just like Brianne and Aidan said, that happen gradually that you might not be aware of. So yes, I would highly recommend that to people too. They used to call it 55 Alive, but I think they now call it Mature Driver Program. So again, as Aidan said, it's free, and I'd recommend that to people too. But so we thank Jane, but thank you, Brianne and Aidan, for your presentation today. And obviously from the comments, I think that people really did appreciate the information sharing that we did, and we will make it available both in the brochure and on our website. So I'd like to thank Brianne and Aidan again, and also the members of our subcommittee that have worked on this with Brianne and Aidan, and that is Elliot Paz Jensen. You would have heard her ask a couple questions. Cynthia Johnson, who's the one who's been behind the technology, myself, and Doug Surtees, who I think you also saw at the very beginning, but Doug is our board member and the person from the College of Law that supports the program with the pro bono students. So thank you to all of these individuals for our presentation today. And I said that I would mention at the end a couple of other things that are coming up this week. Tomorrow, Thursday, March the 16th, people are invited to attend our Hub Club, which is a free program of SCOA, and this time it's at the Mayfair United Church, and it's suitable for St. Patrick's Day. It's an Irish fiddle event, so I would invite you to attend that at Mayfair United Church at 2 p.m. And then Friday, we have our Globe Walk Zoom event, and that's also on a St. Patrick's Day theme. There will be some Irish dancing displays, etc. So if people have some time on Friday afternoon, they could join that event. You would need to register online to get the Zoom link for that. So again, thank you to Brianne and Aidan, and to Jane Sexton, who's left us now, and also to Doug Surtees. We thank you for all the things you do for SCOA, including this program, Doug. And we'd ask you to visit our SCOA website, which is really informative and talks about lots of other both online and now in-person programming at www.scoa.ca. So with that, I will thank you for attending today's presentation, and I hope that we'll see you at some further presentations in the future. Thank you, Brianne and Aidan, and thanks everybody. Bye-bye.